We hope you're having a wonderful evening, dear listeners. We are reunited here to talk about an important organization when referring to the context of the first half of the 20th century, the League of Nations. What could you tell us about its origin and the context it was built in?
On November 11 of 1918, the Great War ended as Germany signed the Armistice Treaty. The conflict was recognized as officially terminated after the Treaty of Versailles signature the following year. The treaty stated punitive terms for Germany, accounting the state for violently destabilizing Europe. It was then clear the states needed a mediator institution to avoid future conflicts. So in 1920, the League of Nations was founded with 41 members as the first intergovernmental organization established to promote international cooperation and achieve international peace and security. It is often referred to as the predecessor of the United Nations. Its founding document, the Covenant of the League of Nations, was drafted during the peace negotiations preceding the end of World War I. The creation of the League marked the beginning of an era characterized by multilateral cooperation for peaceful conflict resolution. The member states renounced secret diplomacy, committed to reduce their armaments, and agreed to comply with international law, and pledged acknowledgement and respect of territorial integrity and political independence of all state members.
With such a peacemaking posture and commitment to the maintenance of the balance of power, we could say that the League had its achievements regarding those objectives, isn't it?
The League of Nations was the first international organization that has aimed to control international affairs and, in order to achieve that, it launched in its own international bureaucracy. Though its main organs, the Secretariat, the Assembly, and the Council, it was able to form a new multilateral system by the end of the 1920s. They definitely had their achievements regarding the objectives they proposed to themselves as an organization in which they consist of taking 500,000 prisoners of war to home and to their countries, helped Turkish refugees, attacked slave traders and drug sellers, supported measures against leprosy and malaria, settled the dispute between Sweden and Finland over the Åland Islands, stopped the war between Greece and Bulgaria. The League accomplished successes worldwide in the fields of law enforcement, health, and education. Though its Opium Commission, it managed to control drug trafficking and worked on implementing an international system on drug control. The League also dealt with the suppression of human trafficking and the protection of women and the children by creating the advisory committees. Advisory on the traffic in women and protection of the children, adopting international conventions, and implementing special programs to achieve major improvements. One of the most known achievements of the League's related to humanitarian work was the creation of a new passport. The League of Nations passport, better known as the Nansen passport, was an identification card for displaced persons issued by the League in 1922. The implementation of a special passport was done to help the millions of Romanian and Russian refugees who had been deprived of their nationality.
We know that the organization ceased operations on the 20th of April 1946, but what was the reason for its failure?
The failure of the League of Nations comes primarily from the lack of enforcing mechanisms to protect the Covenant. However, there were several events that ended up exposing the flaws of the League and its incapacity to achieve its main goal, world peace. The first problem with the League of Nations comes from the drafting of the Covenant itself. The Covenant of the League of Nations revolved around peacekeeping and international cooperation. This was planned to be achieved through some of the main principles, which include a sense of respect to states' sovereignty, the self-determination of nations, and an alliance within the member states according to its 16th article, which mentions that a war against one member is a war against all. All of these concepts result in an extremely idealistic agreement that depended on the members' compliance with sanctions to keep working successfully. Another problem was that the United States never actually joined the League of Nations, even though it was mostly based on Woodrow Wilson's idealistic liberalism and 14 points. The influence that the United States had on the creation of the League of Nations and the lack of actual involvement in it led to question the actual legitimacy of the League. As third and final point to the League's failure were the conflicts that the organization failed to prevent. After the Great Depression, with fascist governments rising in Germany, Italy, and Japan, came multiple violations to the Covenant, all of which passed unpunished and generated no real consequences. First of all, Germany had the Volkisch international policy, which promoted the idea of German race superiority, contradicting the League's values and agreements. To avoid the sanctions and consequences, Hitler withdrew from the League of Nations in 1932. That same year, Japan invaded Manchuria, a region in China. The League failed to exercise the power of the alliance and imposed economic sanctions, which failed to be effective and caused Japan to resign from the League in 1933. In conclusion, all of these events contributed to the weakening in the perception of legitimacy of the League of Nations and exposed the lack of enforcing mechanisms that the organization had to actually succeed.
We could definitely say that, as an organization, the League of Nations had its UPS as it had its downs. But how could we understand its actions? What were they basing on their politics and their way of working?
Well, in order to understand the actions of the League of Nations, it is important to define what was idealism, an important philosophical school of thought that was born after the so-called 14 points of the U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. Regarding international relations, idealism promotes open and multilateral diplomacy, regulated by international law and international organizations, approaches that eventually led to the creation of the League. According to idealism school, the purpose of foreign policy should be the respect for moral values as well as human rights, while its main objective should be to obtain and maintain peace. And in order to achieve these goals, idealism considers as necessary to apply open diplomacy, general disarmament, and peaceful procedures. And having that in mind, it's obvious an organization based on those beliefs would not flourish. First, following the disarmament principle, the League did not have any military forces nor power, resulting in a challenge when dealing with hostile countries. Second, even though the basis of idealism was open diplomacy and international cooperations, the sanctions given by the League were not applied properly, thanks to the unwillingness of the member states to work together and due to alliances formed with aggressive countries, thereby turning the League of Nations into a powerless, unrealistic, and naive organization. And well, as an example, when Italy, a founding member of the League, conquered Abyssinia, also known as Ethiopia, the great power violated Article 10 of the Covenant by disrespecting the sovereignty of the state. In response, a series of sanctions were applied, nonetheless, failed to cause any consequences to the country. First, due to Italy's withdrawal from the League in 1937, and second, due to the tacit agreement Italy had with France and Great Britain, in which they agreed to the Italian annexation of the territory.
Even though the role of the League of Nations was supposed to be more relevant and hold much more importance and power in the international system, not all international organizations commit the same mistakes and follow the same principles regarding the interactions between actors. Nowadays, international organizations have an enormous importance in maintaining order inside the international systems, such as when using their global or regional perspective to identify issues that might escalate in tensions or conflicts before they even outbreak, but also while giving early warnings or resolutions on international conflicts, aspects that make this type of organism so important. Even though the League of Nations failed to succeed, it served as a blueprint for our current international organizations such as the United Nations. Knowing the history of their predecessors helps to get an understanding of what could be improved and what mistakes could be avoided in the management of international organizations that seek to achieve peace and collaboration between countries to have better conditions in which nations can prosper. And that brings us to the end. We'd like to thank the audience for their time and attention today. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to open up the discussion in the comments section, and feel free to suggest any topic you would like us to discuss in our next episode.